Hi, I'm Denise Vaughan, and we're going to talk today about effective public speaking. Let me start with a little bit about where I'm coming from, so you know that I, have a right to talk about public speaking. I'm the director of forensics here at University of Washington Bothell, and what that means that I coach the speech and debate team. My PhD is in political science, which is kind of an interesting workaround to coming back to teaching communication. But we really do both. We spend a lot of time talking about policy, and we talk about how to get things done, and also how to persuade people with our rhetoric, the ways that we speak, the way that we hold our body, and the structure of our arguments, so that we can get what we want out of a conversation. And that's really important. So we're going to talk about persuasive speaking today. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some PowerPoints, which if you're watching this online, you can also access those PowerPoints. So you can just watch as you listen to my dulcet tones tell you about persuasive speaking. But you can also engage with the slides as you're watching the video if you like. I want to talk about the basic problem that we have with persuasive speaking. Any type of speech that you do, any speech, any paper, any discussion in the argument, in the elevator, any of those, what you want to do is start with the problem. Many people will start with a solution to the problem, and that's a huge mistake because it sets your audience up for a misunderstanding about what you are speaking to. So a persuasive speech does this. It tells you that there is a problem in the world. That problem it's important, it's a big problem, and that somehow that you can solve it with policy making. And whether this is in the workplace and you can solve the problem by scheduling out a week in advance, or you solve the problem by having better communication skills, all of this must be founded in some sort of way that they understand the root of the issue. Why is this problematic? Because we're human beings and we like comfort, and change is not comfortable. So in order to get them to change, to do a call to action, which is the critical difference between a persuasive speech and any other type of speech, you have to give them motivation for that. So let's talk about getting there. Let's start with what is important in persuasive speaking. And in persuasive speaking, the big difference is a call to action. So at the end of your speech, generally, sometimes in the middle, but generally at the end of your speech, you're going to get your audience to do something, and it's likely something that's uncomfortable to them. So you should start your speech not really with what they're supposed to do, because they'll resist, but instead start your speech with something that ties them to the audience, right? Ties them to you as a speaker or makes them interested in the topic. You know, my favorite place on earth is the Olympic Peninsula. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's amazing. Did you know that we have a rainforest in Washington State? I mean, how cool is that? I go there a couple of times a year. Mostly because I want my son to grow up with the same life experiences that I did. You know, the smell of the forest all around you, the trees slowly dripping, which my son refers to as tree pee, and sleeping on ground that's spongy when you walk on it. That's amazing to me. It's vivid. The colors are, there's nothing like being in the rainforest. And it's really important. In fact, the rainforest, other than the ocean, is the largest single carbon sink, which means that it eats up the carbon that we produce as human beings. So it is saving us from global warming. The sad part is Congress agreed this week to force states to either buy up nationally recognized forest land and manage it themselves or sell it off to the highest bidder. This is not a joke. Congress sold off your natural forests, your national forests, that were mostly reserved under Roosevelt so that they could be used for mining and logging. It's not just a crisis to me and my son wanting to go there. It's a crisis because it's saving us from global warming. There were 3 parts to that problem. I hooked you in, cute child, always a good hook, right? So that you feel connected to the topic, to the person who's speaking, and to the issue that you can solve. I told you why the problem is big, and then I told you how to fix it. Right? We got to get Congress to do something, right? Because they did something wrong. Cool in the gang? There are essentially 2 approaches in persuasive speaking. You can do a central route or a peripheral route. This isn't my thinking. This is actually some pretty darn good communication theory that's been around for a while. The central route means actually that we go right down the middle. Just what I did. Tells you an important topic, gives you the argument, and warrants for it. So you make a claim, like global warming is bad, and then you make warrants for it because it kills crops, because it damages biodiversity, it acidifies the ocean, whatever your arguments are. It's a very logic-based approach. Most of us believe that we use this tactic when we use persuasive speaking, and it's a great tactic to use. You want to use this when you have strong arguments because it'll engage your audience in detailed discussion. It works best when your audience are going to think about the topic for a long time. So if you are going to your boss with a new policy plan and you want them to think about it, central approach is what you want. So right down the middle. Also, it's great for complex issues. It's a really bad approach if you already have divisive issues that you're talking about. Divisive issues tend to be, ones where we're absolutely sure one way or the other. We're either for gun control or we're not, right? Those types of topics are terribly polarizing, and they don't take well with a complex approach. Instead, a peripheral route is better. People are more persuaded in that by flash, the way in which you use your body, fancy slides that come in streaking across the screen. I can't even do those, so I won't be putting them up. But all of that about our image, about our ethos that we come in the room, the impact of our words, raising our voice, watching our speed of our tone, that's about flash. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's good. It persuades your audience. It tends to persuade them most when they want to agree with you and when it's on issues that go one direction or the other, that are very divisive. So really the best answer is if you can use both. If you can be slightly flashy about something that also has evidence behind it. So you don't really necessarily want to do one or the other, but if you fail at either one, it will erode your original discussion. If you come into a meeting trying to persuade somebody of whatever that you want, and you're wearing flip-flops and pajama bottoms, you will be less effective as a speaker than if you came in prepared for that conversation. You look well coiffed. You look like you tried. That's a very big deal in terms of presenting your arguments. So it's best to use both. So let's do a quick overview. Tell a story. That helps hook them. Give the roughly 3 arguments that will support your point, and then bring it back to the call to action that will bring you there. We're going to have Zanaya do this for you in a couple of minutes, but I want to give you a couple of really important tips before we go to our next step. I want to talk about tailoring it to your audience, because this is a huge, big deal. Most of us don't do this very well. Every community, every group that you are a member of has something that we call tribal speak. This is actually Heinrich's term, is tribal speak. What that means is that we use certain language because of the community within which we interact, right? So think health professionals or professors. I can't tell you how many meetings I've been to where we try to use the words that are appropriate, the vernacular that's appropriate to our setting, right? So people who do policy analysis have certain terminology. Nurses and doctors have different terminology. In fact, nurses might have different terminology than doctors, right? And that identifies you as a member of a group. And that identification means your audience starts to identify with you. Cool? Now what happens if you're not a member of that group and you can't use that language? You can actually use that as a way in as well. So if you are not a member of the cohort, say if you do what I do for a living and speak to people who are significantly younger than you, making comments about that are appropriate to that age group out of context also helps you to identify. So if you can say something is cray-cray, it's probably not appropriate in a business meeting, but absolutely funny, right? And helps you to identify with your audience. And it's good that your audience sees you as a whole human being. So tailor to them, speak their language whenever you possibly can, and help them to know that you know what you're talking about. It gives you credibility. You also want to know your strengths. Most of us know our weaknesses, right? Most of us know where we are inadequate. We think about the portion of our presentation we might be called out on. That one study that we read and we need to present, but we didn't really understand one of the tables that we are trying to present. That's what we focus on. But that's not what your audience focuses on. Your audience will focus on what you tell them to focus on, which means whatever you are good at, you should emphasize. Whatever you are excited about, you can project that onto your audience. They want to like you. And we have a lot of studies that say that your audience wants to like you as a public speaker. They want to be energized by you. So if you bring that to the table, you're probably going to be the most persuasive you can be. Figure out whether or not logic or style fits best with your personality. It's hard to do both, but try to emphasize where your strengths are. And remember to stay on message. This is a really critical point. A lot of people drift because they add the extra thoughts that they had on the way from point A to point Z, and you need to very carefully bring them to your message thematically over and over again. This is why your professors put an outline on the board. This is why you emphasize that the first thing that you say is your thesis statement. You bring it up in the middle of your speech, and you bring it up again at the end. Stay focused on your message. Otherwise, the other material that you bring into your speech will take over, and you want to make sure that your point is made clearly. And I'm clicking. Okay, back to our overview again. How are we going to organize a persuasive speech? We're going to start with some hook that allows our audience to relate to us. Then we're going to go to make sure that we make that theme clear right at the start. Then we're going to give 3 main points in support of, possibly 2, maybe 4, not more than that. And then you're going to bring it back to a call to action that is going to make them change their minds. Have you noticed that everybody wants to do everything in 3 reasons, like 3 reasons to vote this way, or I have 3 arguments in my paper? It's actually not probably from the 5-paragraph essay, which was horrifying, but it's probably more from Eleanor Rosch's research. So in 1954, Eleanor Rosch did an important study that tells us that the human mind can handle about 7 things. And then we start to categorize. It's about schema, and we reorganize those schema. So we can handle about 7. So if it's an introduction, 3 main points, and a conclusion, that's well within the memory capacity of most human beings. You can start going beyond that, and it starts breaking it down into smaller sections. So great that we do it in 3 steps. If you do, also remember the human eye is attracted to movement. That's how we hunt and such, right? So you want to move on 3 points. And you'll see Zanaya do this in a moment. You'll have an introduction. You make your first point. You will physically move to where you're making your point. Then you will physically move to where you make another. And remember that if you approach your audience, you move closer to them, you will actually heighten their anxiety, which is good. It draws their attention to a main point. When you step back onto your 3rd point, that will actually decrease the stress in the room and kind of calm things down. And always return to your original spot so that they know the conclusion is happening, right? Your audience then will be clued into what's going to happen next. That's when they should look up and pay attention, and that movement will help them to remember your points, right? Very important. And now we have time to have Zanaya come up and give her persuasive speech. Look out for the key components. Watch for the points in our overview.